Investigating an unthinkable act of hate against NASCAR's only full-time black driver,
Listen
Bubba
up.
Wallace. In the wake of the racist attack, Wallace is receiving an outpouring of support from his fellow drivers. NBC's Sam Brock has the latest.
Racing is the great equalizer.
In a 500-mile race at Talladega Superspeedway, it was this unforgettable stretch before the green flag dropped.
The entire garage area has rallied around Bubba Wallace.
That will likely serve as an enduring image for generations of NASCAR fans.
All in all, we won today. The pre-race deal was probably one of the hardest things I've ever had to witness in my life.
An emotional Bubba Wallace, the sport's only black driver, wept on the track as dozens of his fellow drivers and their crews showered him with love and support, pulling his number 43 car to the front of the line after Wallace was the apparent target of a hate crime.
I wanted to show whoever it was that you're not going to take away my smile, and I'm going to keep on going.
The act that sickened the sports world. A noose left in Wallace's garage stall a week after he successfully lobbied NASCAR to ban the Confederate flag. Current drivers and former stars like Dale Earnhardt Jr. speaking out.
There's a lot of people rallying around Bubba, but I don't know that any of us really understands how that must have felt.
The FBI is investigating whether any federal laws were violated, as NASCAR has launched its own investigation. Racing legend Richard Petty, who runs the team Wallace drives for, called what happened a violation of human decency, tweeting in part, "There is absolutely no place in our sport or our society for racism."
NBC's Sam Brock is at Alabama's Talladega Superspeedway. Sam, any progress on the FBI investigation? One of the things that's so remarkable is when this happened, there were no fans allowed in yet at that point, so only insiders could have had access to that garage.
Yeah, that's a great point, Andrea. As we are waiting, the FBI's investigation, the DOJ, NASCAR, all of them looking into what happened. The noose was found in a garage stall, and right now there's no access over there. Fans here were able to go into the stands for the first time since NASCAR returned. But to get to the garage area, you have to be, Andrea, what they call an essential personnel, which would be teams, drivers, NASCAR officials, cleaning employees, security officials, somewhere under that umbrella. But if you're not, it's not like the average Joe could just make their way back there and put something nefarious in a garage stall, which is why right now investigators we know are going to be looking at things like cameras and who is in there to try to glean whatever nuggets they can. No updates at this point on when we're going to get new information on developments.
Thanks so much, Sam Brock. Such an important and emotional story. And joining us now is Wes Moore, the CEO of one of the largest anti-poverty foundations in the country, Robin Hood. His new book is 5 Days, The Fiery Reckoning of an American City. Of course, this is the Freddie Gray story in Baltimore that you have lived through. Wes, thanks so much for being with us. We've been wanting to talk to you about this and the protests around the country now, a real moment of reckoning for America. Tell me about that, first of all, and how it intersects with the Freddie Gray experience.
Well, when I watch what's happening with the protests right now, we see that the protests are about so much more than just inequitable policing, and that was actually, I think, the thing that we also saw when it came to everything that happened with Freddie Gray. We had people who were protesting this reality of the fact that policing does not take place equitably in every neighborhood. And if you look at what happened specifically in the case of Freddie Gray's crime was that he made eye contact with police and ran. Now think about that. That was a crime because in certain neighborhoods, and what they deem to be high crime neighborhoods, that actually is a technical crime. That's what Freddie Gray did. He was arrested. An hour later, he was in a coma. And a week later, he died. But we saw that when we look at the things that kind of parallel the protests that were taking place then and the things that are also taking place now, is we're seeing that the protests are about how can we provide justice and true justice in terms of equitable policing. But it's also highlighting the fact of race and racism. And the fact that race is one of the most reliable predictors of life outcomes across several areas around life expectancy, academic achievement, income, wealth, mental health, maternal mortality. And so this is really what our society is asking us to grapple with. It's this idea that until we can deal with the causes, we're going to continue to deal with the effects. And when we're talking about the effects, we're talking about this long lineage of names that Freddie Gray just happens to take a truly unfortunate participation.
As Congress is now grappling, and especially the Senate, with what to do about the differences between the House legislation and the Senate bill, and we're hearing a lot of pushback now against Senator Tim Scott's Republican alternative because it is not mandatory in banning chokeholds. What, from your perspective, what should they do? Should they filibuster the Republican alternative? Should they try to compromise? Do you see any possibility Congress is finally going to deal with this?
I think that any proposed legislation that does not deal with not just the immediate things that have to be addressed. So, for example, the things like the banning of chokeholds, the banning of no-knock warrants, looking at qualified immunity, and the fact that the bar for even getting police officers even under investigation for improper activity is so much higher. The introduction of civilian review boards. I think that any legislation that is going to be meaningful in this moment has got to be legislation that also includes how are we looking to look at this problem holistically, and that include all those measures. I also, though, believe that if we're going to actually address some of these other larger crucial issues, it is going to mean how are we thinking about the other elements of justice that are going to be necessary. That when we're talking about things like, the budgeting of police departments, I think we have to be very clear about the fact that budgets are moral documents. And they're very clear understandings of what it is that we will support and what it is that we will use our taxpayer dollars for. So, for example, when we're talking about what it means to be moral document, I think it does mean that we have to decrease this idea of this hyper-militarization that we have within police forces. I think it also does mean that we need to have honest conversations about the fact that in Baltimore City alone, for example, the Department of Health, their budget is around $42 million. The in the police department's budget in Baltimore City is $509 million. So how are we prioritizing a balance? And what exactly is it that we're asking our police officers to do? Because in many cases, we're asking these officers to police things that aren't necessarily activities that they should be policing. And so as we're talking about, these proposed bills, it is the concrete elements that we have to be able to address. And it also is breaking it down to the state and to the local level about how are we thinking about the budgeting that we have, and then what message is that sending, both about the role of police, but then also the role of these other facets within our society that we're then pushing off the police to try to be able to solve.
Now, I want to ask you also about the monuments we've seen today and last night, the conflict in Lafayette Square with the statue of Andrew Jackson. Our colleague, White House correspondent Jeff Bennett, has researched the statue, and it was built by an enslaved man named Philip Reed. We don't have there's no known picture of him, but Philip Reed had been, quote, purchased for $1,200, and he was the sculptor who made the Andrew Jackson statue, and ironically, also the Statue of Freedom on top of the U.S. Capitol. What does all of this say about our society? And I don't know what the solutions are. What do you think?
I think the fact that we have an enslaved person who then uses their time and their talents and their energy to create a monument and a statue to someone who was a slave owner, someone who was one of the architects behind the Trail of Tears, not just the enslavement, but essentially the attempted genocide of Native Americans. I think we have to understand that we are using taxpayer dollars and taxpayer efforts to celebrate a part of history that should not be celebrated. And I think it's important for people to understand what exactly that means when these monuments went up. Most of these statues actually went up post-Reconstruction. Many of these statues coincided with Jim Crow. And so if we are going to have a real process for this country, which is necessary, a true truth and trauma process, to understand that much of where we are right now comes from the history and from whence we came. And for us to be honest about the role that race has played in every single facet of our society, part of that must also mean which statues that we erect, which things and monuments do we use taxpayer dollars to clean and protect, and how do we think about our past in relation to how we're thinking about our future.
Wes Moore, as always, it's wonderful to hear your insights. Thank you for everything, what you do with Robin Hood, this wonderful foundation. Thanks very much for being with us. And
Thank
right
you,
now
sir.
in Atlanta, the funeral service of Rayshard Brooks is about to begin. Brooks, of course, is the African-American man who was fatally shot by Atlanta police in an incident that started with him falling asleep in his car in a Wendy's parking lot this month. The police said he was inebriated. The service at the historic Ebenezer Baptist Church, where Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. served as the pastor. Rayshard Brooks leaves behind his widow, Tamika Miller, and his 4 children.
You're clearly someone who takes
500,000 or so tests are being performed per day. Admiral Gerard said by the fall, maybe they'll get to 40 million per month. But it's clear, that we need a lot more. If you look at these roadmaps to recovery, they say by this point we should be at 5 million per day. Testing. That's in order to really get good surveillance on this. So, that was a significant concern. But again, the idea that
find a urologist and learn about PD.
cases
food, I'm not going to feel good. Putting this back to his signature issue, which is immigration. He wants to visit what new mileage of the border wall has been built and to talk about visas and people from elsewhere stealing jobs from Americans. This was the most successful issue for the president in 2016 when he took the presidency. It did not work as well, though, in 2018 when they tried the whole, all the caravans are coming, you're all in a lot of danger. But I see this as the president really wanting to get back to his immigration issue roots, and I expect a tremendous amount of fear-mongering to be coming very quickly.
Kennedy, I'm not sure it's either fear-mongering or it's a separate, hang on, or it's a separate issue when you say that H-1B visas, I mean, they want to get these visas in order to bring people in to fill the jobs, and there are unemployed Americans right here. He signed an executive order saying you're not going to bring people in from other countries to fill these jobs. Try and employ some Americans first. I don't know, is that a totally separate issue?
Yeah, I think there's a false dichotomy here. What we want is 2 things. One, we want a great economy with full employment, and sometimes that means you have to have immigrants come to this country and fill various jobs throughout society in order to have that kind of full employment, so employers and employees can have a plethora of choices. The other thing, back to David's point, I agree, it starts with education. And what we need is, yes, we need more STEM training, but we need fewer government-run schools. And I know that is heresy for Democrats, but it really does boil down to school choice. And if you live in a neighborhood that has horrible schools, you should not be beholden to send your child there, particularly if they have aptitude in STEM. So give parents the tools to make sure their kids can get a good education so we can fill those jobs in the next generation with bright, fertile minds.
Yeah, no, Kennedy knows what she's talking about. We both have kids in public schools here in New York City, and there are a lot of great choices, but you have to be really tuned in, and you have to be an engaged parent, and then you can find your way for your kid to one of those schools. I really feel for parents that are in other areas where you don't have that kind of choice, which is what you're talking about.
Things like that really surging ahead, really riding the momentum from these nationwide protests. And so while it is very close, Charles Booker has really come out of nowhere.
I want to weigh in, first of all, on what they was talking about on schools, which is absolutely correct. If you're in the right area, don't matter if you're in Los Angeles or downtown Atlanta, or even some of your smaller cities like Memphis, St. Louis, even Knoxville, Chattanooga, Nashville, you have more of a selection of where you can take your children that has reputations of putting out good, clean, devoted students. To where if you're in a country setting, such as what I was in here in Northwest Tennessee, you really didn't have a choice in not only how you was taught, but where you was taught, because it was either go to that school or not go at all. And of course back then, homeschooling was basically unheard of at that time, unless it was just dire emergency situations pertaining to a parent homeschooling a student. Now, getting back to what went on with Bubba, the noose pertaining to discrimination. I personally find it to be absolutely appalling that in the 21st century, in 2020, we are still dealing with hate mongering that leads into fear mongering of people agitating and aggravating, harassing, stalking, and hunting people's lives in this sort of way. That's the very exact same thing that was going on right here at 291 Thompson Road. Whenever all these people was coming out of the woodwork that I didn't even know, that had already formulated some sort of an idea or opinion about me before I ever come back here in 2014. Some of them I knew who they was, but some of them I didn't know who they was. I had no idea that they had been harboring these type of old blood grudges, these type of old animosity feelings, to the point that they was coming out here on the road and basically challenging me to come out to the road to get into a knockdown drag out to see who could get into the biggest pissing contest with whoever. I had no idea that all these harmful, hurtful feelings had boiled up in all these people throughout the years that I had been putting out various pamphlets and various articles, regardless whether it was in cassette form, VHS form, CD form, and now digital form. You know, whenever you take somebody that's been doing what they've been doing for 30 plus years, as I have expressed to Tommy Moore, the judge here in Weakley County, as well as the as well as the sheriff here, Mike Wilson, that's been in power now for 20-something years, 9 elections. Whenever you have somebody that's been this adamant towards doing what I have been doing, not just in Weakley County, not just in Obion County, but the surrounding counties, word gets out towards who you are and what you stand for and what your ministry is about. Word gets out. And to think that these people was willing to attack the founder of this ministry the way that they was attacking this ministry, it's the same way as being a racist towards a hate crime that was going on right in front of Tommy Thomas and all these other judicial authority figures, not just in Weakley County, but in Obion County and the surrounding areas. In other words, it was going on right in front of them and wasn't nobody putting their finger to it and stopping it. See, I remember, this is what I remember in this community that I'm living in right now. In the late 60s and throughout the 70s, probably leading all the way up into the 80s, if a black couple decided that they wanted to come out here and live, they would leave them silent symbolical statements such as throwing a noose around a tree hanging in their front yard. And that was a pretty strong indication to that black person or black couple, whoever it was that wanted to move into this area, that was a silent symbolical statement to them towards basically, get out, we don't want you in here. I can remember that happening more than once here in the Sedonia, Hop-In, Beach Ridge, New Beach Ridge area. And the reason why I call it the New Beach Ridge area is because since I've come back here in 2014, they're not going to run me out. They may do me like they done David towards putting me in a black body bag, but they're not going to run me out. I've made my mind up. I'm going to make a stand. This is what I stand for. This is who I am. This is what I am. And people around in the area, they can either accept it or they can leave me the hell alone towards coming out here provoking some sort of fight or vandalizing our property because of what we stand for out here. But I truly find it to be appalling, sickening, that this driver that has these type of skills, just to be able to drive a car like this, speaks volumes about who this person is. Much less get in a car and stay in there throughout all these laps and come out, I don't know, I think he won, he come out 14th place on this last race or something like that, or next to the last race. Speaks volumes about who this individual is. These investors have invested millions of dollars in this individual. Not the individual that you're looking at right now, but the NASCAR individual. And to think that somebody in that league, somebody within that group of people that was willing to throw out a noose is absolutely sickening and appalling. I give this guy 2 thumbs up in his stand towards what he stands for in the NASCAR industry as far as banning the Confederate flag that stood for battle, that stood for resistance. It stood for, yes, slavery. It stood for suppression. It stood for lots of things that today people don't believe in and don't stand for anymore, unless you're crazy in the head, unless you're some sort of a skinhead or some sort of a drug dealer or a drug addict, or you're just absolutely a bigot to begin with, to the point that you don't understand that we're all created equal. I'll put it this way, these white people that are this way, for whatever reason, that has all this hate in them, if they was in a hospital bed being operated on, and they had to have somebody's organ to basically save their life, it wouldn't matter if it was a liver, a kidney, a heart, I guarantee you these same people wouldn't be asking the hospital, am I getting this organ from another white person? Or am I getting this organ from a black person? I guarantee you, at the point of death, it would not matter. Laying on a hospital bed, at the point of you losing your very own life, depending upon somebody else's organ, it would not matter at that point in time in all this hate-mongering. So all this BS is exactly what it is. It's a bunch of BS, and people need to grow up, get up, and get off of this racial hate-mongering, because all they're doing is tearing one another apart, and that type of atmosphere is not an atmosphere of God. You keep in mind, Jesus Christ was the next thing to a Negro man, probably than any other race during the time that he went through what he went through, because at that time, they didn't have air conditioning. You was lucky if you could find a shade tree. And whenever you're raised up over there in a bunch of sand, guess what's going to happen to you? You're going to become very, very dark. Arabic darkness. To the point that, no, you're not a complete Negro like come from Africa, but you're the next thing to it. See, over here, these people was taught that Jesus was white. That's some of that European ideology towards trying to prove that the white race is dominant over the black race. There is no dominant race. There's a dominant spiritual warfare that's going to exceed and excel above and beyond the evil demonic spirits that's in this world. Because the Bible is very clear towards stating that the meek shall inherit the earth, and greater is he that is within us than he that is within the world. But for all these attacks to be going on pertaining to this NASCAR driver, or the attacks at 291 Thompson Road, or at 430 Beech Grove Road, is all a bunch of BS. And the Ridgeways and the Sheffields and all these other families around here, as far as I'm concerned, can take it and stick it where the sun don't shine if they can't recognize what was going on out here was a total violation of our rights as citizens living either on 430 Beech Grove Road or 291 Thompson Road. Has the event slowed down? Yes, they've slowed down. But it wasn't because of the Weakley County judicial system that slowed it down. It was because of God and God alone slowed it down. The judicial Weakley County law enforcement agencies in Weakley County failed to protect this family properly and professionally. Especially whenever you hire attorneys to represent you and you get bad representation, and then the judges goes along with the bad representation. And it doesn't matter if it's Mr. Moore, Tommy Moore, or if it's Mr. Pence. Whenever you have these type of backwoods judges that are willing to go with this type of atmosphere, that speaks volumes about who these judges are. Just like it speaks volumes about this race car driver that wound up with a noose in his own garage. That's probably worth, ain't no telling how many millions of dollars because of investors that is invested in him. Not just his car, but invested in him. Invested in those talents.
In a way that few expected, unless you talk to folks on the ground and say there's always been this ripe opportunity to take advantage of all the folks who haven't voted, who haven't registered, but now see an opportunity to get into electoral politics, or at least support candidates.
But there's always the question of voter suppression and a controversy over the largest African American district having only one polling place on Election Day.
That number is, it's even worse than it sounds. It sounds crazy. Normally, that Louisville district has over 200 polling places. 200, now down to one. Now, they moved it to a big arena, so they're hoping that at least they have the capacity for a bunch of folks. But when you talk to people, there's real concern that there'll be a replay of what we saw in Georgia, those hours-long lines, the people getting frustrated. And many people will say, you know what, that's the entire point for a lot of people. If you can frustrate the electorate, if you can make people stand in line and make the barrier to actually participating in the election high as possible, then maybe you'll be able to chip off a few thousand here, a few thousand there.
And I know, Tremaine, conventional wisdom would have it that Amy McGrath, as a Marine colonel, a middle-of-the-road Democrat, would have a better chance of picking up Andy McConnell centrist seats. Maybe some Republicans would peel off who are not Trump Republicans. But conventional wisdom is really out the window in this year. We don't know what's going to happen, do we?
That's right, Andrea. The campaign, the Booker campaign has a saying, from the hood to the holler, meaning from the inner city to the rural areas. And they believe that they can take their message of unity, especially now where people are grappling with the nature of systemic racism and police reform. There's this broad kind of cross-racial, cross-cultural coalition forming. And their campaign really believes that if they can unite folks who haven't typically voted in the same manner, even though it's, very conservative Kentucky, they might actually have a real shot. But again, that mountain is high. Mitch McConnell, the old stalwart of the grand old party, he's a force in that state. But, these folks, are riding a lot of momentum.
Stay tuned. As they say, we'll have all the results tomorrow. Tremaine, thank you as always. And you can listen to Tremaine's podcast, Into America. Download it now wherever you get your podcasts. And that does it for us for this edition of Andrea Mitchell Reports. Thanks for being with us. Please stay safe. Remember to...
Now I want to weigh in on what he just said, if you don't mind, to my viewers. I have found Kentucky to be just as judgmental and as discriminating towards their own citizens up in the state of Kentucky as I have the state of Tennessee. And the only reason why that I can say that is because I've lived in and out of Kentucky, with Kentucky being a neighboring state to Tennessee, off and on all my life. Even while I was hanging steel between the ages of 15 and 19, I lived temporarily up in Bowling Green, Kentucky, while reconforming a project at the Corvette plant and having to stay up in that area at a young age, being involved with the construction industry and then getting involved with the auto body industry towards living in Louisville, Kentucky for about 6 months, up pretty close to Frankfort, Kentucky, where the capital is, having social interminglings with people at the horse race and up at Frankfort and various towns in between. And of course the experiences that I've had in Paducah, Kentucky. I've worked, give or take, for about a year and a half in Clinton, Kentucky. Been exposed to various people that had body shops and wrecker services in South Fulton. And also my experiences with the people up in Land Between the Lakes and all the surrounding towns around Land Between the Lakes pertaining to Grand Rivers, Benton, Mayfield, Murray, Aurora, Eddiesville, Green Turtle Bay. I could go on and on and on with various little bitty country junctions around there towards people that I have associated my life with in one way or another, basically all my life. I can verify that Kentucky, whenever it comes to them discriminating against various people that does not have what the high almighties have, they discriminate big time, beginning with Hoptown, Hopkinsville, Kentucky, where I lived and worked, give or take, for about 3 or 4 months before I wound up going out to Denver, Colorado. Hoptown is right there next to Clarksville, Tennessee. Clarksville, Tennessee is right there next to the Fort Campbell Army military base that pulls in a great deal of business from the Tennessee side, as well, I guess, as some of the business in Tennessee pulls in a lot of business from the Kentucky side. Vice versa, whenever you're close to a state line, you can kind of choose between the best of the two worlds. You know, you get your gas over here, but you buy your vehicles over here. And the only reason why you get your gas over here because it's not feasible to drive 20 miles just to save 4 cents on a gallon of 20 gallons worth of gas. But yet now, if you're going to buy an RV, if you're going to buy a car, if you're going to do something big, then you jump over state line. So you kind of get the best of the two worlds whenever you live on a state line area. You know, there at one time you could gamble in Kentucky, but you couldn't gamble in Tennessee. Or maybe it was vice versa. Maybe you could gamble in Tennessee, but you couldn't gamble in Kentucky. So a lot of people would jump state lines to be able to get the better of the two worlds. The point that I'm trying to make is this. I have spent so much time up in Kentucky. I have learned them. I have read them. Just like reading the people here in the state of Tennessee towards how that their very mindset is oriented on what their ancestors believed and what they fought for and what happened here and what happened there. Whenever you're talking about the Bible Belt area, they're very, very conservative in what they believe and how they believe. And it's actually fumigated against them to the point that they're not liberal enough to where if you go across the Mississippi River and go out to your western states, they're actually too liberal over there to where anything goes. You could open up a church out there in the name of a marijuana plant and have a big gathering of people that would come and listen to what you had to say. Whenever it comes to discrimination, they just don't discriminate against color. They discriminate against class. They discriminate against age. They discriminate against whether or not you're one of them or you're not one of them. It's very cliquish in the Bible Belt area to the point that it runs in loops or circles. And if you're not one of them circles or one of them loops, well, then they'll fall out from you and they won't have nothing to do with you. It's just like a restaurant that opened up over here in Kenton, Tennessee that Scotty Whitworth used to run. Because Scotty Whitworth didn't control his wife properly, and she was kind of like myself. She was a straight shooter, and she told people what she thought of them. It basically costed Scotty Whitworth and the dairy bar over here his business because people calumniated against him and boycotted against him to the point that they wouldn't go in there and get a hamburger come hell or high water. Well, if you do that long enough, if you boycott a business long enough, you'll run that business out of your little community. But the characteristics also that I have found over in the little town of Kenton, which is the same way in Sharon, same way in some of these other little towns, is they had a good clinic, kind of like a drive-in clinic over there. And because various people didn't like various people, or various people drove the wrong automobile that other various people drove, they basically boycotted against them and caused them to go out of business too. So what I'm seeing is a pattern in the Bible Belt area that the Methodists don't want to have nothing to do with people other than the Methodists. The Baptists don't want to have nothing to do with the people other than them being Baptist. The Church of Christ don't want to have nothing to do with the Church of Christ people other than the Church of Christ. They're too cliquish. They're too conservative in their discrimination features. And these are characteristics that I have found that goes all the way down to Corinth, Mississippi, all the way down to Little Rock, Arkansas, all the way up towards almost Indianapolis, Indiana. There's a little strip right here. And you can go over to Arkansas and find the same thing. Going over to Missouri and Arkansas, there's a little strip that they call the Bible Belt area. This is the most discriminating area that I have ever found throughout America. And trust me, I've been all over America. From Miami to Canada, from the East Coast to the West Coast, all on my dime, 2 or 3 different times. I know cultures, regardless whether it's Mexican cultures, or it's Cuban cultures, or it's Ireland cultures, Dago cultures, country setting cultures, Yankee cultures, Westerner cultures, Oregon, pertaining to the cultures out there, all the way up to Washington State. Trust me, I know cultures, and probably, give or take, in America, there's probably over, I'm going to say 300 or 400 cultures. Easy. And these cultures stick together. If they think like each other, if they talk like each other, if they dress like each other, regardless whether you're Amish or Mennonite or Jehovah's Witness, they're cliquish. They fit in these little cliques. This is the very thing that has torn America completely in half, towards people being too conservative and being too discriminatory. They discriminate against you if you're not the same age. They discriminate against you if you don't have the proper education. They discriminate against you if one's driving a Chevrolet while another one's driving a Ford. It's the very opposite in the Bible Belt area towards what it's supposed to be as far as the United States of America, not the divided states of America. And that's probably one reason why that this ministry that I have been a part of, the Windmill Ministries in orchestrating, has been so hard to get off the ground, is because of so many people with so many different opinions and so many likes and dislikes. And now they've torn at one another to the point that the whole system is almost at the point of collapse. And they're still not smart enough or humble enough or don't have enough integrity or honesty about themselves to come out of that darkness into the light in supporting the ministry. So I'm kind of like Christ whenever Christ went up into the mountain and said, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, I've gathered thee together as a hen would gather her chicks, and ye would not listen. Christ was at his point of despair whenever he went up into the mountain and said those things, because he realized that his works was not being effective in the way that he wanted them to be effective in. Not during the time that he was trying to be so influential in that area. And I think out of despair, I think Jesus, out of a sense of defeat, went up into the mountain and said, I've gathered thee together, and ye would not listen. Just like I preached a message for 30 plus years in this area, not realizing that they was formigating so much hate mongering against the very founder of the Windmill Ministries, to the point that they was willing to come out here and show themselves the way that they showed themselves, towards being nothing but a bunch of barbarian heathens that would perform and act this way in attacking my brother and I again and again and again, times 1,000. And we've got proof to validate these claims up in the sheriff's office, towards the telephone calls that was put forth during those 20 and 14 and 20 and basically 20 and 17, where my brother got ushered off into an early death on account of all this pressure and all this ungodliness going on around here. We've got proof not only in the sheriff's office, but we got proof of it in the courthouse. And we still cannot get no judge. We cannot get David Moore, that used to be the chief over there in Martin PD. We can't get none of these mayors or none of these officials to do anything in a public official way towards apologizing to this household. And you wonder how come you're seeing all these things happening on TV, and now they're trying to tear down Mr. Jackson's statue there in front of the White House. You're wondering how come you're seeing all these things occur? It's because Satan has been set loose in this nation that is out to kill, steal, and destroy. And because of it, he's wreaking havoc, coming near a neighborhood near you, because the church society in this nation has failed the true church, which is the church of God that stands beside the Heavenly Father on the right hand that's still making intercession prayer for you and I to this day. The Bible Belt, so-called church, or churches, the people have failed the true church that is sitting up on the right hand of the Father.
Follow us online on Facebook and on Twitter at Mitchell Reports. Chuck Todd and Katie Turr pick up our coverage after a break.
It's sad. We're living in sad, perilous times.
People waited in the rain to pay respects to Brooks at a public memorial. But Chuck,
that man that was shot in the back, he didn't deserve to die that way. If he was drunk, yeah, he deserved punishment. But the punishment of drinking and driving don't persist of shooting somebody in the back. This all stems from what happened 30 plus years ago with the Reagans and the Bushes. And until that part gets wiped clean, until that part of history gets rewritten towards where we're at now, we can expect for more hardship to fall upon to the American lives. Because it began right here in the core of origin, beginning in a little town called Kenton, Tennessee, which is about 7 miles from where I live, the way the crow flies, with Mason Hall, with the mayor, and various law enforcement during that time that decided that they was going to mark an individual and brand him as him being mentally incompetent. Well, we're going to see who's mentally incompetent towards the road that we're heading down. The whole time, I've been preaching a message of peace, love, forgiveness, and utopia. They didn't want that around here. They wanted to argue. They wanted to bigger. They wanted to falsely accuse me of me grandstanding, or falsely accuse me of me trying to hustle them, or falsely accuse me that I was writing some sort of manifestos, like I was some sort of Unabomber or something. They wanted to falsely accuse me that I was a liar, or somebody that was out of his mind, or somebody that was not in touch with reality. All these false innuendos have led us down this path to where we are right now, towards a noose being thrown into a man's garage that is a predominant NASCAR driver that I grew up in the same neighborhood, experiencing the same thing, knowing that that was wrong. Just like it was wrong for my father to reject Memphis, Tennessee, of receiving my brother's organs at the age of 19, simply because of my father's sickness, of him having the same type of disease, of prejudicism and racial divide. Good luck to all of us. Shalom.